Let's see. It's 1 minute after. I'll just give a kind of a brief introduction disclaimer before I get really started to give people time to come in. Um, so I'm sharing my screen. I've got a PowerPoint presentation really just as a guide. So it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. I'm going to show you both GIMP, Inkscape, and um, in iRacing, and then probably a browser view. So I'll be switching through a few applications, you know, um, to go through kind of how each of those are used and how to get what you're going to be trying to accomplish, which is get a paint or a livery for your car in iRacing. So I'm probably not going to go into super in depth into each one of them, but enough to get to accomplish.
Come here.
There's some giggling in the background. There's no giggling allowed. Okay. I'm not going to go full screen with my PowerPoint presentation just because I tried it earlier on and it kind of messes things up. So can everybody see that? I've kind of maximized the PowerPoint.
Yeah, that's good for me.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yep, got it.
And like I said, I'm gonna switch through a couple of different screens. And so here's a summary overview of what I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover how to use the template. So the template is a guide for painting that's provided by iRacing. It's provided for all of the vehicles that they have in their fleet. And when you open it up the first time, I know I did, it didn't make any sense. You got some of the details, but you really had to kind of look around. And I'll show that and explain the different parts of the template and what I did to help myself. And I think it would help you if you're looking at it for the first time, because it's sort of difficult, other than the obvious things, to see what is what, and how to get organized to get good results. And then I'll introduce both GIMP and Inkscape if you're not familiar with them very briefly, but then I'll just go into how to use them, how to create assets. So I use that term assets being, what kinds of things are going to create for your livery. And I'll describe that in depth, and you'll understand why I refer to them as assets. And then I'll do a workflow, meaning an example. I'll go through an example. I'm not going to go, I'm going to do it fairly quickly, but to show you how you can use the assets to basically get a half decent livery in a short amount of time, or really shorten the process of it. And then I'll go into, where does it all go? Where does it end up in iRacing? And how you can use things like trading paints. To obviously, trading paints is the only way that we can share our custom liveries. If you make one for yourself and just have it on your local machine, no one else is going to see it. Everybody else would see the kind of stock paints. And trading paints was developed for that. It's a third-party application, but it basically just manages the paints for you, and gets the paints for the people that you're racing against. And it does that when you start a race, start a session, it goes and gets their paints, and then loads them into your paint folder. And I'll explain a little bit about the folders, because you'll need to know kind of how it's organized, to be able to kind of, in the process of developing your paint, to your livery, to help you see it. And you can see what I've got on the screen in the background is one of the things that I'm going to use, is the showroom in iRacing. All right, so this is what you see when you would open the template for the first time. If you're not familiar with where the templates reside, you go into iRacing, and you can go into the paint shop section of iRacing, and you will see all the different cars, and then the basic schemes that you can get. the kind of stock schemes that you can't really customize too much. Um, and then you'll be able to, at the bottom of that screen, you'll be able to see where you can download that template. Maybe I can just show you there really quickly. I'll go to iRacing. I'll close this. And I'll go into the paint shop. And then I will select the car that we're talking about, although it's pretty much the same for every other car. And you'll see the kind of stock paints on the left, that basically, if you apply, different colors, it'll basically make up a whole bunch of different kind of stock schemes, which is better than nothing. And then you can also do things with the wheels, colors and finishes. But right at the bottom, if you scroll to the bottom of that section, there's download template and instructions on how to use this. So I think those instructions are very good. I'm speaking to them, speaking about using that template within GIMP and Inkscape, and I as opposed to, say, using Photoshop. There's lots of different tools that can handle the type of file. They provide the template in a PSD, which is a Photoshop file, um, and that can be read and opened by GIMP, um, as well. And that's the example that I'm going to show tonight. All right, so let me just I'll come back to the showroom. So if you're not familiar where the showroom is, if you open up the iRacing UI and click on My Content and Cars, um, then you'll see, this is usually what will pop up right away, is the cars. So you scroll down to the car that you're interested in previewing, and you click on the car, and it will load a really, really simple but cool 3D view of the vehicle. And you're kind of wondering, well, what the heck am I looking at right now? But I'll explain that in a second. So I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint. Um, so I'll do a little bit on GIMP now. So GIMP is an open sourced uh, raster graphics editor. A really complicated way of saying that it's like a photo editor. It's very much like Photoshop is. It can open multi-layer files, and the layers will become really apparent and important as we go. You'll see how that's a really powerful tool, and we're going to really use that feature of GIMP to be able to to achieve the results. But when you first open that template, this is the view that you get. I'm going to switch to GIMP in a minute here now. Um, and like I said, the template is a PSD file. It's got different sections that I'll explain. Uh, and we're going to focus on a couple different key areas. I'll switch to GIMP right now. And so we see that same view. This is what we would see if we open that file. And I'm just going to pause there for a second. Everybody okay with the pace? My outrageous foreign accent is not throwing you off?
That's
E-
good.
Everybody's good? Okay. So the three sections that I'm going to talk about are kind of over here on the right. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. I never checked that before. So that's good. Um, so the three sections that we're going to work with, some of them we're going to leave, and we're going to really focus on the paintable area section. That's probably we're going to do the most of our work. So if I click on the plus and open up the different layers in the paintable area, um, we we see a bunch of different things, and each of those layers, if we switch on or off, we'll start to see the effect that it has. So the little eye icon um, lets you turn it on or off, and when you do that, you can start to see, well, which ones. It starts to make a little bit more sense when you switch them on or off. Some are really subtle, like the pit box colors are really, really tiny squares in the bottom, kind of off to the center here. When you switch them on and off, and it lets you switch um, the colors in as you come into the pit box, to customize a little bit there. You can even switch the number color, so that's the color on the windscreen um, that you can switch on or off and customize. The tub color, so that's the interior of the car. That's also a tiny little square that's easy to miss, that you can toggle to have a look at. But the one layer that threw me off at first is the layer that we see. This is the most visible layer, which is kind of the stock the stock livery, the stock paint for the Cup car. So if we see it here, we see a thumbnail representation of it, and it's a very helpfully named car pattern 001. If we switch that off, then we start to see a planar view, and this is what we're going to work with. We're going to work with the kind of base layer, or also very helpfully named in the template as layer 68. There's some code there. All right, uh, and so you might have noticed in the I'm going to switch over to the showroom. You'll notice that I've got a car with a bunch of numbers and a bunch of lines, and that might not make any sense. So I will start to change some of the switches in GIMP, and that'll make a little bit more sense. So one of the really helpful things that I found after digging to find it was to use the wire. If you switch the wire on, you start to see how the paint, which is all flattened out, will get wrapped around the car in the game. So then it starts to help you to see which areas are going to go where. You can start to make out certain shapes. Um, most of them are quite obvious. You've got the wing, you've got the wing end plates, and then the basic shape of the car kind of flattened out if you made it out of cardboard and then cut it apart, and then the rear, the rear section of the car. What's also really important here is the areas that are blacked out. So the areas that are blacked out, which you can switch off by turning off the car mandatory layer, is basically like no go. They don't really want you to paint there, and it will be overwritten by what iRacing does anyway. Um, there's a few other little things in here, but we end up turning all of these layers in red off. And there's a note there. It says turn off before exporting TGA. So when we're finished with our paint, or when we're wanting to see what our paint looks like, we would switch these off. Or it sometimes might be helpful to leave them on, or at least the wire on, to kind of see where you are with things, which is what I've done in this view in the showroom. I've left the wire on, and I've left this other layer that I created, which I call paint by numbers, which is pretty obvious why I called it that. So I'm going to switch back to GIMP, and I'm going to leave this template aside. I'm going to close this template. And what I've done is I've done a version of that same template, but I've changed a few things to make it helpful. So, and I'm more than happy to share these files. This is basically a blank canvas. It's ready to paint, take it to the next steps. But I've done these things to make it quicker for me. I found it more logical when I had the numbers down for orientation of certain sections and explained certain parts. So what I did was I reversed the I inverted the color of the wire. I found it was much easier with lighter schemes to pick up the black as opposed to the white of the wireframe. But because we turn this layer off, it doesn't really matter what color it is. It's really for visibility. Um, and what I did was I created in the paintable area, because I talked about that's where we're going to do the most of our work. I've switched off that stock paint, and we're not going to use it unless we really want to use it as a guide, because sometimes it is handy that you know what it looks like, so you can switch it on and say, okay, well, what part of the wing is that going to go, and which direction is it? So I've kind of, it's handy, but then I did the paint by numbers layer to help you to kind of find your way a little bit easier with that. So with this template the way it is, if I was to export it and then view it in the showroom, and I'll go through that in a little bit, that's what it looks like. And so I really did this it's kind of a step backwards, but I did it to make it easier to find my way when I was where am I going to place things, where am I going to paint, what do certain lines, where do these lines fall, in GIMP, where do the lines, what do they correspond to, and what do the different colors in the wire layer end up, where do they end up being wrapped, and those are helpful for limits when you're painting certain sections or placing assets that I'll talk about later. And you kind of see how the lines are there on the closer lines when there's more of a curvature on certain parts, or when there's more detail when the 3D models are created. We don't have to worry about that part. The other thing that was really handy I found was the mirrors. The mirrors are really not obvious in the template, so I blobbed some numbers on those, and you can really see. After a while, you don't really use this, but to get going, it makes it much quicker. Even the underside of the wing, I put a number on just to help you kind of find your way. Um, so I'll go back to GIMP. And what else can I explain? Let me just go back to my presentation. Um, so like I said, the template's a PSD file, and I explain those sections. We're going to work mainly in the paintable area, and the helpful additions I talked about were the paint by number section. All right. So to complement the use of GIMP, and I think this is where my method kind of diverges from other people's methods in doing this. I was really comfortable in using both GIMP and Inkscape. Inkscape, similar to GIMP, is an open source, but instead of being raster based, it's vector based. And what does that mean? Okay, so what it means is if you are wanting to recreate a livery or get assets from photos off the internet or drawings off the internet, um, it allows you to either recreate them in really high quality versions so they look good on the livery. And what I mean by that is they don't look like what's up here in the top right hand corner. If you were to just download an image of the Momo logo, it's going to look pixelated when you put it on the car. But if you use a vector based, so it's kind of line based, even though this particular logo it's not very sexy, it doesn't have any curves on it, it's all angles, but you can see the difference in how clear it looks versus other. And if you had similar logo with shapes, you're going to see a much better result. And the other thing about them is they scale very well. By that I mean, if you want it to be bigger, if you enlarge a raster-based image, it'll look very pixelated. I'm not going to say it'll look rubbish. You might be going for that look, which I believe somebody was running last night in the race. It looked like good old 8-bit video games. I mean, they've done it. He did it for a reason, because he wants to unveil his new livery coming up. But that's the kind of result that you may end up with. It may be, you know, not great. So knowing that Inkscape existed and I was comfortable with using it, um, I found it was a really good tool for the creation of assets, and it plays very well with GIMP. So once you create an asset, and I'll show examples of that, you can export that to GIMP, and they look really, really good, and they turn out very, very well when you turn them into the file that you would use to apply to your car. All right. So I've introduced GIMP and Inkscape. I'm going to talk about assets. So I'm sure a lot of people because we have similar interests, we probably have similar backgrounds. At some point in our misspent youth, we made Airfix kits or Tamiya or other things. And this is probably one of the greatest parallels that we can, if you had, you have at one point when you were making those kits, you dealt with water slide decals. And you either cursed on them or you were a dab hand at them, and it made a massive difference in the way your model looked when you were finished. And the great part about these is there's lots of third-party companies that make these decals, probably to get around, at times, cigarette and alcohol advertising. Obviously, they couldn't include in certain models, but for the less, or more innocuous models like the Bromos Porsche that I've got here in the center, or the Momo Porsche, there's not really too much there. Maybe the Penthouse is questionable, but we'll leave that one. But the Martini is obviously a liquor company. You wouldn't, if you would have bought the model, you wouldn't have got that decal. So these third-party companies, make these, and these are a fantastic asset for recreating liveries. So you can find high-resolution versions of these on the internet. Not every site, but there are some sites, and you can bring them into Inkscape, and some of them might have a watermark across them, but I'm just gonna, you can use them as a guide to help create the shapes to make, give you high quality shapes. It kind of depends on how much time you want to spend. You can, like anything, you get into the weeds and details of these things, and you can spend a lot of time. But the what I'm kind of shooting for is giving you examples that you can create in a short amount of time from resources on the internet that are pretty much free. We're not doing anything commercial with these. This is for fun, and to kind of enhance our enjoyment in what we're doing with our racing. So I took the example, to start creating some assets for the worked example. I'm going to do something different, but I started looking at, well, what kind of things, to recreate the Momo livery. Um, when you start to look at it, it is really kind of simple elements. There's not too much there. It's a lovely base color, and then the arrows. So they're really simple geometric shapes. You can create those very easily in Inkscape, and I'll just flick over to Inkscape just to show you that. No, I'm not going to do that right now because I don't have the right example up. But um, what I did was I've exported from Inkscape into my PowerPoint presentation, say, these arrows. So these arrows were really, really simple to create. You pick up, the color from the example. It's got a black outline, and you get the basic shapes right. And then obviously there's going to be some adaptation. You're not going to fit the exact shape of a 935 slant nose onto onto the cup car. But with the way the template works, you can have shapes that are longer or bigger as long as the key parts end up in the right place. You're you know you're you're going to be most of the way there, and that scalability factor that I talked about, you're going to be able to scale them to what you're looking for without losing any quality. So you'll notice in the center, I've got three shapes that look familiar: the bonnet, the roof, and the rear deck. And what I did, now we'll switch over to GIMP, pardon me, Inkscape. What I did was I exported the wire layer from the template, and then I was able to create those shapes or copy those shapes and turn them into, and I said I would share these, and I'm happy to do it. Um, Turn these into shapes that are usable. And the great thing about them is once you have them in Inkscape, you can easily change their color, their fill color, to whatever you want. And if I wanted to change the trim, the trim color, um, creating a border, I can switch them around, and it makes really lovely sharp results that you can easily export and place, as I'll say it looks like a painted section, but it's really a decal. You can keep them plain, and because of the layers, we can build up the look that we're going for without getting into painting too much. Real painting, as in using the paintbrush tool, which can be a bit fiddly with a mouse. So was my way around it. I'm not very artistic, but I can understand, the software and kind of maximize it for the results that I'm trying to achieve, and have it look, quite professional. Professional looks good. Okay, let me go back to my PowerPoint presentation. So that kind of covers the two pieces of software. I know I didn't go into a lot of detail into both of them, but we don't have to use all the tools. We just need to use the basic tools. And when I do the worked example, you probably see it. It's like, having all the bells and whistles, and it's like Microsoft Word. You don't use 95% of the basic features to make a document. It's pretty much the same with GIMP and Inkscape. There's a whole bunch of things in the menu, and you're not going to use a lot of them. But it's going to be about managing the layers, and then maybe creating assets in Inkscape, um, and getting them into the template, the right place as a template. So that's my next section, which is going to be doing a worked example of the what I think is one of the most you know coolest looking liveries. I think it did make it onto a 935 at one point. I know this is not a cup car, but I thought, well, it still looks great, and how would it look on a cup car? Um, so this is probably another part of the process that I think is really important, is finding a design that you like. I've kept it fairly simple. It's geometric. It's got some easily recreatable logos, but it's got some lovely colors. And I thought right away, well, most of this is going to fit. This line on the side will, well, our car has two wheels on one side. It's probably going to fit. We can probably make it fit. If we have to adapt it, we can change the length. We could probably, cut this part into sections to make it fit as we want. And then obviously we've got the Sunoco name logos, but we've also got the Sunoco Aero logo. So those are the kind of assets that I started thinking, well, those are going to be the assets. The base color, it's pretty straightforward. It's a uniform color, and it's really, I'm going to divide it up into two parts. There's a base, which is the blue, and then the kind of silver in the lower half of the middle section of the vehicle. And I thought those, we can adapt those to the cup car, no problem. In the middle, I thought, well, what we don't really have an open cockpit, but we still have kind of a similar shape, in that we've got a windscreen, we've got a bonnet, and we've got a roof and a back lid. And I thought, well, I'm not going to retrace that, but if I can recreate the style of that, which is why I use that shape that I had made for myself, I can give it a yellow fill and a red trim outline, and that'll probably look really cool. And I'll do the same for the back deck. So I was planning it in my head. Um, and then what I started to do was I started to put it together in Inkscape. So I imported this picture to have a reference, and then to keep the kind of colors uniform, I sampled the color. So both in GIMP and Inkscape and other packages, you'll have this little eyedropper tool, and you can pick that up, and you can start to look and examine what those colors are. And you'll see a color in red, green, and blue, and then you'll also see a color code for those particular colors. So when I was happy with this sample, I just took note of what that code was. I wrote it as a text section in my in my asset file, and then I knew that if I wanted to match any other sections, like the base color blue in my base paint in GIMP, I had the code for it already. So it kept things uniform. Um, it might be curling the eyebrows of people that do color matching and Pantone and all that stuff. Um, it, you know, it between pieces of software, they should match. There's probably going to be subtle differences, but for what we're doing, and I think for the outcome that we want, using these numbers is going to be you're going to be very close. You're going to have someone who's very attentive, and hopefully at 150 miles an hour, no one's going to notice. So the three kind of primary sections, the red, the yellow, and the base color blue. I left the silver out. I think I did the color sample, but it didn't quite look right. So I ended up painting a section. I'll go through that when I move over to GIMP, to to get it to look right, because the color that I initially picked, once I painted it, it just didn't look right. So then, what are the assets I want to create? Other than, like I said, I've got the roof, I've got the bonnet, which in the end I didn't really use, but the back deck and the roof created that center section. And then the other sections that I wanted to have, were the Sunoco. I'm going to move into the center section of the Inkscape file. The Sunoco, um, which I basically recreated from one of those decal files. Uh, the left and right lines down the sides of the vehicle. Um, it seems ridiculous to have two different versions of it, but when you flipped one, because there was letters on it, it didn't work. So I had to create a left and a right. It's really just the basic parts are exactly the same. It was the letters that I had to then reverse the order of to get it to look right. And then the wing end plate. Um, and you'll see why I did this kind of triangle section when I move over into the paint in GIMP. So I'm going to just pause for a sip of water. And then I'm going to move back over to GIMP. I'm going to close this. I'm going to call it my paint by numbers template. I need a better name, but that works. And then I'm going to move into the one which looks exactly the same because I've got all the layers switched off. I'm going to turn off this top section here. And you'll see I've got the wire layer switched on to help us see where we're going. And I'm going to leave that on just for now. And then I'm going to open up the paintable area section. So to make it easier, I grouped all the paint by numbers, even though they're individual numbers. I grouped them and put them in a layer folder. So it's easy for me to just switch that off. That switches all of them off. And then I created another layer group, which are all of the assets. And this is where I think the parallel to building the plastic models and working with the decals is most applicable. So you'll see when I open it up, it's a whole bunch of layers, but they'll make sense because each of them I'm going to turn this off, and then I'll turn on, for example, I'll turn on the roof. Actually, no, they're all turned on. So we'll look at them all at once. I've got the R decal layer. I'll switch that off. So it starts to, you can start to see where it makes a little bit more sense. But so each of these are, you can deal with individually. And I've also got a plain base paint because it was kind of easier to see. So it was much more like the template. So I'll switch that off as well. And I'll switch on our base paint. So this color here, this color blue, is that color that I took a note of in Inkscape to keep it consistent. And the assets are the left and right lines, the wing end plates, and the rear deck, the roof, and then basically two versions of this same asset, just scaled differently to be able to fit onto the wing. And the bonnet. And I also created, because it was in line with at least this version of the livery that I found online, the car number. Even though we're not using it, I liked the way it looked. So I thought I'd drop that in as well. So once I had the left and right. Basically started out with the left and right lines. It was finding a way to make them fit. And you'll notice that I go over the lines. I dropped it in and just scaled it so it would fit more or less. And some of it goes over the line, but it's okay because iRacing just kind of ignores that. Yes, it probably overlaps this. I don't even know what this part is. Um, um, but it wasn't outwardly visible, so it turned out quite well. And I'll shift down to the other end, and you'll see that this ends up near the headlight. So some of these are not, it's not fully apparent where they end up, but that's where the showroom is really really handy. So you can put one of your assets on, you can export it, and then you can switch over to the showroom because it will instantly update any changes that you've made to that kind of exported file. Now I'll go into more detail on kind of where those files sit and how to do that, but I'll just come back to the assets. Um, so really, it's kind of the roof and the back deck are easy because they're already the right shape because you've got an outline shape, and you've made them the color. And your design may not have this trim, but I could see that was from the design, that would look you know kind of neat to have that. But even without the outline, it I found it would I think it would be really handy to have those shapes, and that's why I created them. And then so I'll just select one of those, and you'll see how it's basically treated. They're treated like individual decals. So back deck, once you select it over here in the layers, it selects it, and you see it highlighted by this dashed line. Um, so that helps you to know that you're on that layer. If I could paint over top of it. I could put something else over top of it, um, like another decal or some other detail. And that's where the layers are super powerful. You can start to build stuff up, to get a look that you're going for. If you've got a complex shape, there's no sense in trying to get it all in one. You can build it up from different either assets or you can paint directly. I said that I made it easier by doing that. To me, I found it was the easiest way. Um, Instead of painting directly on the layers, I used assets to get those shapes. But um, I gave the example before where I went over the lines. You could easily paint over the lines, but I actually tried to draw this or paint this that red outline, and it was just a nightmare. I just thought, well, I've got to think of a better way to do it, and that's where I thought of using Inkscape to do that. Okay, so um, and you'll notice there's an exception to that. You'll see the silver sections, and then the mirrors that don't look anything like mirrors. I'll just zoom into that section for now. Um, and when you get a little bit closer, you start to see the basic shape there. But it's actually broken up into two sections. There's an upper and a lower. And so I thought it would really be kind of cool to get the upper in red and the lower in yellow. It mirrored, well, it replicated two of the colors, but it reversed the order, and it gave a cool effect. And then I drew using the paintbrush, and then in certain sections, to try to keep it as straight as possible, I used the straight line function, to paint these sections, um, to get them that color. I didn't think it was worth to create an asset to do that because it was quite a simple shape, and you can see I drew over the lines, which is clipped by iRacing when. So I think what I'll do now is I've introduced kind of the basics um, of the different sections. Um, why don't um, I'll just replicate getting one of the assets in there, because I've just told you that I got the assets in there, but the process, um, you would create them in Inkscape. And so, for example, um, I've got this asset here, which is the Sunoco sticker. I'll call it a sticker. And then I want to export it. So what the basic export function of Inkscape is export as a PNG. Uh, Lots of three-letter acronyms here, but in this case, what's important is PNG is a very high quality um, that retains vector. Any kind of if you have a vector image, which is, remember that Inkscape is a vector-based package, it will it will keep those properties. So in other words, when we bring it into um, GIMP and we scale it, because we're inevitably going to either scale or rotate it to get it in the position that we want, um, we don't want it to pixelate. So it retains the quality that we're looking for. So we select it. We go into our export box. We want to keep selection. That's what we want. We want to just export that. We don't want to export the whole thing. We give it a name, and you'll see I've already kind of got one here. And then we click on we say save, and then we click on export. And because I've already got it, I'm not going to replace it. And then we go into GIMP, and then we say that we want to open as layers. So keeping that theme of, we're putting decals on our Tamiya car. We go into that folder. I'll go into, here we go, tutorial, and I'm looking for Sunoco decal or logo bonnet, and then I say open, and then there it is. It's in, and that dashed line is around it, and you'll notice that it created a new layer. So we have the freedom of placing it in front of or behind existing layers to build up areas. Um, but then we can use the move tools, and we can move it around. So say if we ridiculously wanted to be here, we could put it here. Or if we wanted to say, let's maybe a little bit more realistically, we want to put it here, but then we want to make it fit. So we would pick the scale tool, and then we would scale it. Now, because we want it to keep its aspect ratio, so we don't want to squash it in vertical or horizontal. We would make sure this thing here is on, which locks the proportions. We grab one of the corners, and that looks like it's going to fit up here. So we'll say scale. I'll zoom in. We'll grab the move tool, and then we'll put it, where we more or less where we wanted it to turn out. Um, so now that I've placed an asset, what I'll do is I will export that so we can see what it looks like in the showroom. So this is going to introduce the file format that we're going to need, or that iRacing needs. I'm going to leave the wireframe on so we can see that. Normally you would switch that layer off, but I'm going to leave it on. And I'm just going to say file, export as, and then we're going to go into, and this is quite important, we're going to go into the iRacing folder. So we're going to go into, usually it sits on your local drive in your documents folder, iRacing. And then in iRacing, there's a folder called Paint, pretty logical. And then you've got all of the vehicles. So we're going to go down to the one that we're looking for, which is the 911 Cup car. And then you need to give it a name. So the format for the name is car underscore and then your ID number. So your iRacing ID number. So in my case, it's car underscore 429955. You'll notice there's one there already, but that's fine. We're going to overwrite it. I'm going to say export. It's going to confirm that I want to replace it. And when you're working on a design, I find that I was doing that. It's an iterative process. You want to see what it looks like. It's much easier to visualize it in the showroom than it is on, in the flat version. You never need to change any of these settings here. You just click export, and then what you do is you switch over to the showroom, and there's our design. So, I skipped a whole bunch of steps because all of those assets are placed on it. But if we go around to the back, look at that. We've got Sunoco on, it might not look 100%, but it doesn't look too bad actually. But you can start to see, you know, well, in this section, if I switch back to GIMP and zoom in on that section, you start to see where these lines sit on the different components of the vehicle. So you'll notice that kind of everything in pink there's no point in putting anything inside there because it's not gonna get represented. That's gonna be filled by these other kind of weird shaped components that are grills and other little bits and diffuser that you can't change anyway. But say it's not in the right place. Say we look at it and we think, you know what, that might look pretty cool in this space here. So I can pick it up. I can grab my move tool, make sure that I'm on. I've got my move tool, and I can just move it to there. I'm happy with that. Then I can do Control R, which repeats the exporting. I'll just do it anyway. I'll go export as, and we're already in the right place because it's it was the last folder we were in. I'm just going to say export, replace. I'll always get this, but you'll just say export, and then I'll go back into the showroom and boom. So you can start to, change your designs. And this is actually a fairly new feature. The showroom wasn't there before. It used to be that you would have to go onto a test track and actually be in the car and then have to do Control R once you made any changes to your paint. So this way you can switch back and forth between the showroom and your paint, to make changes, iterate your design, get it to look like you want. And then eventually, you would say, okay, well, I don't need the guidelines anymore. I'll switch those off. You'll notice it looks really super plain when you do that. But we'll export it. Same deal. We'll overwrite. Go back to the showroom, and that doesn't look too shabby.
Okay, good.
Now, the other thing that I found handy to have was, obviously, I'm not going to go into the decisions about using it or not. I default to use it, but the club decal layer, I'm going to switch that on. I find it's really handy to help place things as well. Oops, I've switched on the wrong one. There is a generic one, but it's not the generic one that we want. It's the PCGB decal layer. And I'll just repeat that process, because then it'll look much more like we expect the cars to look when we're racing. Go back to the showroom. That looks, not too bad. Um, Obviously, there's some shapes that are quite complex. So placement sometimes of logos, they might look askew, but that's where I find the lines really helpful, because you'll look at key parts. So say if you're trying to place, these arrows in a particular spot, if you have the wire switched on, you can start to see, say I'll re-export that. I know I'm going really quickly, so I can appreciate that you might have questions about it, and I'm happy to repeat anything when I take questions. But then if you can zoom in and say, if you can use the lines and the intersections of the lines as targets. So you say, well, no, I think I need it to end up there. That you'll get a sense of, what other references were that sort of section. Can I find that here? And then move it to where you want it to go. So you can easily pick up. And because I use each of the assets as a layer, I'm not moving a whole bunch of things at once, and you're not having to move things. You're moving it. They're completely independent. Um, so I know I've covered like a whole lot of stuff. I'm just gonna go back to my PowerPoint presentation. Um, I skipped a bunch of steps because obviously you wouldn't, you'd be thinking about your design, you'd be creating your assets. I showed you one example of bringing one asset in. Um, it's what I did was I did it to because I found I was having to do trial and error to place things. I wanted to make that as simple as possible. So by having the wire on, by having the numbers, helped me to find where the locations of things made the most sense. Um, Let me just go back to the presentation. I'll go to my last slide. So um, I'm showing off my livery for season 3, and I went really quickly through um, how to get things into the showroom. I talked about the folder structure, but I haven't talked about trading paints. So I'm just going to go back and repeat the exporting process. Um, so as you're working on it, like I suggested to leave the wire on. It's really helpful to see in the preview. So um, you can switch. If you have things switched on, they will end up in your export. So if you can see it in this view, it will end up in your paint file. So right now I see the wire. The wire is going to end up, and it's going to be end up being exported, and it's going to end up on the car. Um, and so when you're finished, and you think it's finished, because you may miss things because of the wires being on, you'll switch the wire off, and you'll do an export, and you'll check it. And the great thing about the showroom is that it's 3D. You can zoom in and out. You can look at different features. Um, and you might notice that I have a really fetching pink interior. Now, that just happens to happen because there is some wire in. Remember, I talked about the tub color and these boxes here that control different things. If I turn the wire back on and the paint the um, and zoom in, this little square here represents a swatch that gives you the tub color. So you can actually customize that if you paint this swatch in. But for some reason, they put there's some wire in there, and I think that wire represents the structure inside the vehicle. It doesn't need to be very big because it's not of important detail. It fits on the 3D model, but the paint doesn't need to be in great detail. So that's why there's this blob of wire. That's why it ends up looking pink because I inverted the wire color. In the normal, I guess the template color, it ends up being green, which is the inverse of this color here. Okay, what else was I going to just go through? So the structure of the files is have a look at that. You can't really mess it up because if you do kind of upset, or if you were to delete all of the files in your paint folders, in your iRacing paint folders, when iRacing runs the next time, it will reload them. Now, um, so you go into Documents, iRacing. Unless you've installed it somewhere else, it'll sit in My Documents, iRacing Paint, and then the car itself. You'll notice that there's a whole bunch of different car numbers here. And when I get to talking about trading paints, that'll become, that'll make more sense. Um, and why there are other car numbers that sit here. So I've saved mine. I'd save it there, and that's where iRacing will pick it up from. Yeah, that's about. Now in here, there are two other files to talk about. I'll just scroll down to the bottom. Maybe the TGA files. There'll be two other kinds of files. There'll be a decal file and a spec file. I found it was easier to just include the decal file in my paint file. You can separate it out. Um, I don't do a lot of iRacing. This is the only iRacing that I do, and I guess the way they set it up was that if you had, a basic set of decals that were your sponsors, you could be running multiple cars and have one decal file, and it allowed you to change, say, your paint or your car for paints on different cars, but still have the same decals. Um, and then the last one is a spec file. So this one is really kind of bizarre, and I'm going to leave it to the very end. You'll notice at the very top of our layers, I'm just going to cancel this out here. At the very top of our layers, we'll see custom spec map, and it's a kind of a strange concept to get around, but I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to save that to the end. So let me go back to the showroom. And what I'm going to do is actually, no, I'm going to open up my browser because I didn't have it open. And I'm going to open Trading Paints. Okay, so um, I'm going to assume that most people, well, obviously for our group, we need to be running Trading Paints because I just realized I'm not signed in. 2 seconds. Okay. Um, you open up Trading Paints. You need Trading Paints to be able to trade paint between cars. If you didn't run Trading Paints, you would see everyone else in a stock livery, and you would see your great paint, but no one else would see it. So that's the point of Trading Paints. Um, don't know why iRacing didn't bake that into it, but it works for us. You don't need to have a paid account. I am I'm barely employed, so I can't afford a pro account. So I've got a really basic account, but it does let you upload paints that are applied to your car. And when Trading Paints is running, if you're doing all of this work, all of this lovely work in the showroom, Trading Paints will overwrite that the next time that iRacing runs. That's when Trading Paint does a check, unless you're in the game and you do Control R. That will force the reloading of the paint. So Trading Paints, like I said, you go into My Paints, um, and like I said, I'm not running anything else, so I'll go down to the Cup Car, and my paint will show up there. So the next time I run um, iRacing, this paint will get loaded and will overwrite that file. But what it also does is when I go into a session like last night, Trading Paints will also be running in the background and say, I have, what was it, 50 odd other cars, and I will check Gilles' um, paint cup a folder and look and see, does he have everyone's paint? And if he doesn't, then I will basically get it from Trading Paints, and I will download it onto Gilles' computer. So that way, um, you can Gilles will get to see everybody's paint. So it's kind of a workaround, a sleight of hand to be able to for everyone to see everyone's paint. Um, and the great part about that is when I said that those files were all in there um, in that folder. Um, if I was to open one of them, I'm going to go to that folder. And if you were struggling for an idea or you wanted to see how someone created a certain thing in our group or from our group, you could go and just grab one of the. I'm just totally at random. I didn't pick anybody's. Um, I don't know whether that was from. It could have been another race that I did. Oh, I might have been watching some other racing, but you can start to see, although there's not as much detail, you can start to see where things are. And if you remember how it looks, you can probably steal some bits and pieces. So you can see that there's three colors on the in the rear section. How did they create that, and which sections did they paint to make sure that you know, um, those lines ended up being how they look on the model. You can use it as an example and flip back and forth. I found that a really, really handy thing. I picked a bad example. Let me see if I can grab another one that is one that we recognize. Um, I should know the shortcut to get to this directly. Yeah, oh, here's one that we recognize. Gary Tall. Okay, so very colorful, very geometric, but you see how it all kind of comes together. So when you start to look at it this way, um, it'll either look a lot simpler than you think it does on the car, but you can start to see where all the components come together, and it'll help you to give you some ideas and maybe give an indication on how it was put together, whether he did it himself or not. I'm not sure. Um, all right. Okay. So Trading Paints manages getting the paint files that you are missing locally, loads them for you, so you can see. Um, and if you've not done it already, well, probably if you don't have a custom paint scheme, that's how you would share it with everybody. You'd come into here, you would say choose paint, choose new paint, and then you would upload that file. That file would sit in your Trading Paints account, and then the next time that Trading Paints would run, iRacing would run, and Trading Paints is running, it will upload it to everybody else's computer. So there's a whole lot of data moving around the internet. That's why we know where we're buffering all the time. Okay, so I realize you were all really asleep, or you're totally captured by what I've been saying. You might have a bunch of questions. It might be a good time to stop before I cover the last part, which is about the spec map. I'm going to give a really simple example. I'm hoping that but it is very different from the rest of the kind of painting. I use that term in, air quotes, painting. I, don't do a lot of painting. I do asset placement, and then maybe do a little bit of painting. But I try to keep the painting to a minimum because I found I was getting much more results with the asset creation and placement, that was akin to building plastic models that I enjoyed doing when I was young. And I know that there's been a few people that have posted about uh, being, uh, quarantined and starting to do that again from the stash of models that they had in their lofts. So can I open the floor to people if people have questions? Did it make sense? Did I go too fast? I know I covered some things very quickly, but if I did and it needs more explanation, maybe tonight's not the time to do it, but I'd be happy to have one-on-one discussions, tutoring. I have had so much help from people when it came to my driving, and other bits and pieces about getting up to speed with iRacing. I thought this would be a way for me to give back, and I'd be happy to to impart some of my experience and knowledge, or help you with your paint. Or in a few cases, I've been able to create some paints for people. I enjoy doing it, um, and I think it gives other people enjoyment as well. So, questions?
Charles, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
It's Danny here. As I say, thanks very much. I mean, really enjoyable to watch you'll take us through the journey of creating the paint. I recently, in the last couple of weeks, got into this a little bit, and it's been such good fun to try and
Yep.
make it work. And I'm sure you can relate to that, obviously, because I can hear your enthusiasm for it. So. I think a lot of the issues, for me, coming in completely from nowhere, one of the biggest issue was actually the terminology of everything,
Yep.
and all the controls and the menus, inside the GIMP program. It just, they don't.
Yep.
It's incredible. So getting your head around it is quite tough. But I think you kind of quickly zone in on the basics that you need to do.
Yes.
And it took me ages, and for anybody who's not done it before, it took me ages to actually grasp the theory of the layer thing. and
Yes.
how everything was on top of each other, because I couldn't
Yep.
work it out at all at once. But I was struggling a bit recently when I wanted to bring an image in from outside. So somebody sent me a logo, or they sent me a picture or whatever, to try and do it, and the formatting of it I was struggling with. So I was really interested to see that your approach to the asset management piece,
Yeah.
was quite interesting. I think I missed the first few minutes, so apologies if I didn't get that.
That's
But I thought
okay.
that
We're
I thought,
recording it, so
yeah, I'll check it out later. But I thought that was really really helpful for me, because I thought, okay, if I think of it in those terms, it just makes managing it and tracing
yeah.
my steps backwards later far easier, and stuff like that. Something I did find though is when you export to the TGA file, the other thing, I had no idea that the iRacing had the showroom thing, so that's saved me a load of effort. Thank you for that. And then, but on the export thing, there's a shortcut where it just goes straight through to the previous file location,
Yes. Yeah.
which
I
I
thought
found.
that was Control R, but I
Yeah,
probably just
I think
forgot
it's
it.
I think it's on the file menu or whatever. But I think one of the things for me was, is there any particular format that works better than others? So if somebody sends you an EPS
Yeah.
file or a PNG
Yeah.
file or that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, what should I be looking for because I've had those problems. We've gone in and you kind of made something a bit bigger and then it looks crap, basically.
Yes. Yeah. That's
Or you try and change the color and you don't quite get all of it, and that
yeah.
kind of stuff.
Well, that's where I found Inkscape to be really, really handy. I know that there's people that are really, really dab hand at GIMP, and they probably could do it within GIMP. But I knew that with my experience with Inkscape, and it's vector based, that the results would always be good. And the PNG file, when you're bringing it into GIMP, is probably, and I might get shot for this, is probably for our uses,
Yeah,
the one of the better ones. I don't want to say the best one, because there's probably, there's so many different ones, but what it does is it respects that vector based thing. So when you scale them, you don't lose quality. I think that's to a point. But the dimensions we're talking about, the template file is 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels.
yeah,
So when we bring in individual assets, they can look a little bit pixelated if they're raster based. So for example, and it's horrible of me to pick on this, but I think it's just the nature of it when you get this small. If I zoom in on the Porsche Club Motorsport, it looks a bit pixelated there.
yeah,
And but then kind of as soon as you start to get in on any of these things, it's going to, that doesn't mean that it's going to look pixelated when we put it. So it's kind of a representation, an interim representation of how it's going to end up. But was in the same situation as you, Danny. That I was bringing stuff in, I was doing it directly, and it looked, well, to me it was unacceptable.
yeah,
So that's when I started to use the. So I guess because sometimes you will get EPS, sometimes you'll get, because depending on who if you're working with somebody, they may have it in that format. That's also a really high quality. It's kind of a mix of a vector and a raster based. Um, Inkscape deals with that very well, and then you can kind of distill it down to a PNG file.
yeah,
I think GIMP also does, but then once you start moving it around, it creates a raster based version of it, and it looks awkward. And I just found, if I stick to one, and you will notice that, I have some that are JPEG, because when I got them in JPEG, these arrow ones in the front, they were quite good. So I didn't bother to mess around with that. I just brought them in as JPEGs, so you can see that they're there as a layer as JPEGs.
yeah, gotcha.
I ended up tweaking the color because it wasn't the same, but that was easy enough. I just painted over top of the yellow to match the color.
Yeah,
Um, so I guess the most direct answer is that in my workflow, I use the Inkscape as the buffer in between it, and then it distills it down into the one format, and then
yeah,
you bring them in as, I'll use that phrase decal, because I like that. and then you're moving it around. It's just like you're sliding it around with water slide decals. You get it into the right position. Obviously, it's far more powerful because you can scale them, you can rotate them, you can even distort them. But I found that I didn't really have to do that very much. I could get it to be to the point where it looked really good. I didn't have, you'd have the odd rotation. I think when I brought in the big lines here, I had to, I did a slight rotation, so it ended up being, it looked better, kind of in the middle section of the car. So even though this line isn't straight and this line isn't straight, when finally gets rendered in the showroom,
It was
that it followed the line of the door, and
right.
that's where I was going for more than anything, because the rest of it kind of diverges from that. And you saw on the original, in the original vehicle, that part sits, around the rear wheel arch. So that's where, by having them as vectors, I made it slightly different. I adapted it to what I wanted.
Great, cool. Okay, so my takeaway is like, if you're going to want to really get into an image or change it, or I'll do it outside of GIMP, ideally, where you've got a bit better control.
I think I was more comfortable with the controls in Inkscape than GIMP, and
Yeah.
I think that it allows more possibilities. And then working with the shapes as well. I think because I was already doing that, then why not use Inkscape? And it's two pieces of software, but it got me to the result that I wanted, and I was comfortable with both. To someone else, that may not be the right way to do it, and they can do it all in GIMP. Then that's great too. And
Great, thank you.
Gents, if you're looking for graphics to lay onto your car, if you can find them an SVG, a scalable vector graphic, that will give you the best option for rescaling it. Because quite simply, an SVG isn't sort of putting the pixels in place, it's a mathematical definition of what the picture should look like. So in other words, it recalculates as you stretch it or shrink it. So therefore, it always stays perfect. So if you want to find the best logo you can, an SVG will do the job. But they're not so readily available as a JPEG, PNG, or whatever.
Yeah. But that reminds me, Mark. I never mentioned that Inkscape's native file format is SVG. So that's why when you scale things as you're looking at them on the screen, you'll notice that my file name is sunoco-details.svg. So these are all scalable vector graphic format. And so when you change things around, they don't lose quality, so to speak. They don't get pixelated.
Groovy. Hey, I think GIMP does support bringing in SVGs.
Yes, it does. Yeah, but because of the I was doing manipulations in Inkscape, and its kind of most native form, and because of the resolutions that the template requires, the PNG format was kind of sufficient. It was an easier way to get the files into GIMP. So basically, the message is there are a bunch of different ways to skin the cat, but if you want to do it and retain the quality, it's PNG. And like I said, I didn't want to be shot for saying it was the best one. It is one of but SVG as well is very, very good because it retains its all of its feature because it's mathematically represented, as opposed to being individual pixels that have a limit in size. And once you start enlarging them, those pixels just get bigger, and it makes it look crap. Any other questions?
I've got a couple of questions, if that's
yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
So I've been part of this group and part of iRacing for about 3 days.
So you're a professional by now, then?
Oh, absolutely. So just like, I've not even done a race yet, right? So I've been heading around Oulton Park in an MX-5 at the moment. So I take it I have to buy the car within iRacing to get the template.
I think you can get the template I don't have any other car then. No, that's not true, because I'm using my son's account. So I've switched back over to iRacing and I close this. And I guess these are my son's cars because that's how cheap I am. I'm using my son's account, so he's got quite a few of them. So I don't think that the cars wouldn't show up. But if you go into the paint shop where you get the template, it does say paint my
My
cars,
cars,
but
yeah.
then you can click on all cars
All right.
and say, oh, I don't know, one that he doesn't have, a prototype car. No, it only shows my cars.
Okay.
So I guess there is another way. If you go in through the the non-UI version, you can download the individual templates. Let me see if I've got a browser open. I can go.
We could send you one if you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they are available.
I mean, I'm going to buy it anyway, right? So
Yeah.
it's fine. I was sure I'd seen a video somewhere of someone saying, "There's all the cars you can have, and here's the template," and I couldn't find it anywhere. So
Yeah, and I guess the unfortunate thing is that it's chopped and changed. The site's evolved, so when people do videos,
yeah,
they'll do one version, it's been updated, and it might not be in the same place. Just like I talked about, the showroom. When I made that discovery a couple of months ago, that was a
yeah,
big deal,
that's correct.
and not everybody knew that it was there.
So I take it if I'm kind of painting a car, then I can use my own logo on that car. There's no restrictions. I mean, it's my logo for my business. That's not a
Sure.
problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some iRacing restrictions. Obviously, they're pretty user common sense. They don't want anything that could be deemed offensive but there are actual, like you get into the wording of that when you agree to, to having an account, you kind of agree to abide by those things. And
Yeah. No, I wasn't thinking anything like that. I was
no, but it's one of those things, and unfortunately, they have to say it because there
sure.
are people that think, oh, what can I put in my car to offend the most? Probably from some other subtle things about certain flags being used in racing. That is probably where that stems from. So
Sure. Okay.
um,
I noticed in your list of layers you had that PCGB decal layer.
yes.
Where does that come from?
Okay. So I think there's kind of two versions that have been floating around, not to disparage either one of them. And I struggled with the transparency of the most recent version that was there. Um, but it is quite easily fixable. It seemed to have a non-transparent background, like a plain white background. And I was talking to Joao the other day, and we were struggling with that. But that was more on me, that I had left an old file in my paint folder. But once we resolved that, it was fine. So that particular file, you'll notice when I switch it on or off, it's just the stickers. It's just
Yeah.
so we can make sure that we can either point you towards. I don't want to talk out of turn here. I've incorporated one into mine, and like I said, I was happy to share my GIMP version of the Porsche Cup car with the paint by numbers part. You can use it if you want or not, and it just so happens that it has the transparent decal layer. And Mark will probably, if I've disturbed something in it, I hope I haven't. I wanted to just try to respect all of the sponsors that we've had, and that's the reason that we have them on the car. You know, um, but Mark or someone else will put me straight if I misspeak on that topic.
I've just pinged you the message from within the images channel. It's in there, and if you look at the push pins, it links back to the message.
Okay.
There's the PSD version, which you can just import into GIMP or Photoshop, but there's also a TGA version already that using trading paints, you can just add it as a decal layer
into that decal file.
Well, that's the one that we had problems with, Mark, the other day. So if you do use that, because there's been some small updates to either iRacing or Trading Paints, no longer works, because when you upload it to Trading Paints, it gives you a white car.
Oh, the TGA file does.
Yeah. That's what happened to me.
We maybe need to redo it. There is a PSD file in the channel as well, actually.
So what I did was I took the PSD file, and then I imported it as a layer and then I made sure that everything else was transparent. So that's how I ended up with, I renamed it just for my purposes as this layer here.
I remember two different TGA files kicking around. One was
Okay.
the one with the white layer, which was the cock up basically, and then there was a
Okay.
replacement later on. So I don't know where it is on Discord though, but it's
Okay.
around somewhere.
No, that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I think it's
Thanks very much.
probably best to go with the original file, but you know, I'll kind of leave it in the file that I've created if it's helpful for people. Okay, so I think I've got. I'm happy to take more questions. Have we covered everything for people, or everybody clear, or has people got other questions before I move on to the kind of last topic?
Sure.
Okay, good. So so the last topic is going to be about the spec maps. So please open your minds. It took me a long time to kind of get to grips with this. So my explanation of it helped me. And you'll see when I start to open this group that it's a bit strange. But if I keep it simple, and I'll show you the example, I'm hoping it's going to make sense. Okay, so big preface there, but so I'll open it and you'll see that I'll keep these others closed. So I'm just looking at the spec map, and that there are really 4 sections. There's a red channel, there's a green channel, there's a blue channel, and an alpha channel. Really what you need to know is that you're going to be working in the red channel and the green channel. And in each of those, by default, you will find 2 layers, parts and basic paint. So you'll notice that they're the same kind of thing. You'll notice in the red channel, it says metallic, and the green channel is roughness. So basically what it means is you can create a layer that will affect everything underneath it and either turn it metallic or rough. And so, and this is probably the most important part, is that you don't really want to mess with the parts in either section. So that basically makes those. Remember, I talked about those areas that you know, like the diffuser, the trim on the front. Let me just switch to this. You know, these trims and stuff like that. You can't really paint those. I think there's some workarounds, but you don't really want to mess with those. I mean, uh, I've got better things to do. But you know, if you really wanted to make all sorts of changes, you know, I think you can dive into them. So, but how they look, and by that I mean how glossy they look or not glossy, is set by those 2 sections, this parts and this parts. So there's a certain amount of metallic and there's a certain amount of roughness, the right amount that's been added to make them look glossy, if that makes sense. And then the same in the basic paint section of each. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off these, and I'm going to switch the spec map layers on. It's going to look very strange, and I will switch off the part that I added. So you'll start to see a few things that sort of make some sense. So the areas that you see that are kind of half gray, light gray, are areas where they've added a certain amount of those parts that I talked about, the gloss. So the badge, which is an obvious one, but there's the other areas, the bonnet catches, the screws at the top of the which I think is the egress window, other things. Right. So really, the only layer that I think that I was brave enough to do and got a result that I wanted was this layer here. So what I did was I created a layer. I left these 2, you know, all of this stuff to be just stock right out of the template. And this is the way I've come to understand it, was if I paint in the red channel, all of these areas will look and I turn it into a spec map, all of these layers will look metallic. So to me, what was most logical on this livery was the Sunoco logo, both wing and bonnet, and that gray, which sort of looked metallic, this section here, to replicate the livery that I chose. And so this is the part that makes it even more complicated, is the spec layer is completely different from the paint. So when you get, what you want out of the spec layer, you have everything else turned off, as in the paintable area. So you're only exporting the stuff, and it's really difficult to visualize, even with the showroom. I found what things you were changing. So what I will do is I've already turned off the wire. So when I update this paint, the wire will go away, but the metallic will come in. So I want you to look at this area, and the side area when I update it. In some cases, it's really subtle, and I think it's better to go with subtle than kind of in your face. That's totally my personal opinion. I think there was some lovely liveries that used a lot of metallic last year, and some of them I thought went a little bit too far. So I'll export this, and it's a similar process. So when we have that, the part that we see, once again, I was talking about, if we see stuff, that's what's going to get exported. So I'm going to export that. But now what I'm going to do in that same folder is I'm going to just change the name slightly, and I'm going to call it car underscore spec underscore. So it's the same format. And I'm going to, it's going to give me the kind of normal things. That's now in that folder. And then when I go into the showroom, you'll notice it paused a little bit, and notice the subtle difference in those logos in this section. So when I start to spin the car around, what I exported only altered the spec layer. Notice it didn't touch the paint. So the wire is still on, even though I have it switched off. I didn't touch the paint. And it sometimes it's really, really hard to see. So you got to get the angle right to get the light to glint off of it in the showroom. But you see my protector, Labrador Retriever. You see the effect of that, and of course that has an impact on the brightness of the certain area, because the showroom only has a certain amount of lighting. It's a really, I think it's a really convoluted subject. I think they made it very, very complicated. I'm just going to go back to GIMP, and I've seen an explanation that talks about painting in layers of gray or shades of gray. But I've also seen an explanation where if you want to get metallic, you're going to paint sections in the red channel metallic, create a layer in red, and I just chose pure red. And if you want to create sections, say, would be matte or rough, then you would paint in the green channel. I've seen less examples that look good. If you wanted a matte paint finish, then that would be the easy way. There's some tutorials online, but I found that I got more success with just doing subtle areas in metallic than to go whole hog and have a mix of matte and glossy. If you want to tackle something in matte, I'm more than happy to try to help you with it, but I just didn't find it to my taste. So let me explain how I got only those sections to come up and made it easy for me to paint in full red. So what I did was I set up full red and green. So in my kind of paint selector here, you notice I've already got them set up. But if I click on them, you'll notice that it's just RGB is the section that we want to look at, and it's 100% red and 0% green and blue. And I've done the same for green. It's 100% green and none of the other two colors. So now that I have those set up, to select it, I come back to my painted area, or to my assets really, and say, it's for example, the really easy one would be in my base paint. I'll switch this back on and I'll turn off. This is only to select the area that you want to paint. That I want to select that gray. So I go in my base paint. Well, it doesn't really matter where you're selected. And I choose my magic wand selector and I click that. And you'll notice it puts a dashed line around just that part. Now I'm not doing anything with it, I'm just selecting it. So while it's selected, I come back to that layer, I turn off this, and then if I paint in that area, I will only be able to paint in that area. If I try to paint here, nothing's going to happen. You're creating a mask. It's like, if you were painting in your house and you put masking tape down, the only part that's not masked with masking tape will let you paint. So I'll just switch the colors so you can see I'm not lying. I'll switch it to green and you'll see. So it's a really precise way of getting the exact area that you want painted. And you can do the same with the logos. So if I pick the Sunoco logo bonnet, just so you can see it, I'll make it easier to see. I'll come back. I'll select none, but then I've got that partially selected because it's an asset. But I'll do the magic wand and I'll select it. Now, because there's a couple different colors going on, you'll notice I didn't get it all, and it only selected the yellow, but you can throw up the threshold quite high, and then it'll get all of it. Then you can hold the shift key down and you can add to your selection. A little bit tedious, but once it's selected, come back up to that layer, into glossy, and then you can do the same thing. You can paint in just where it's selected. So if I do the same thing again, show you that I'm not making it up. I've switched those from red to green. So a little bit more laborious, and I think the results, the reward on the results, to me, I'm really doing it for completeness, because people did get into that. With the spec map, to kind of get metallic results. It doesn't work with every paint scheme, but you kind of, you can do some embellishments that you wouldn't have normally been able to do. Even if you were to get like a metallic looking paint, you're not going to get that metallic effect. So it's like that, just like a metallic paint finish on a real vehicle. So make those changes. Once again, switch off the stuff that you don't want to see. So if you're looking at, and this is where it can get a little bit confusing, because the paintable area is now sitting under the spec map because it's lower down on our layers. You can forget that it's on, and end up exporting something that iRacing doesn't like. Just check here, these two groups, make sure they're both off, and then export that as a spec. Go into the showroom and see what it looks like. Obviously, the green's not going to, that would turn that back to kind of the normal. It would ignore it, because it's in the wrong layer. So I find that topic much more confusing. I can't say that I completely got my head around it, but I was able to get results that were reasonable by keeping it simple, as in selecting the parts that you want to turn metallic, create a new layer in the red channel, making them metallic, and then leaving these two the same, or as they are stock, because it ends up giving you that normal, there is a normal reflectivity to the paint surface. If you were to delete those layers, these basic paint layers, both gloss, metallic, and roughness, you end up getting a completely matte car, and it just looks bizarre. Once again, if you're wanting to go for that, then it's there as an option.
Charles,
So
Steve here. What are the grey areas again? Can you paint those red or green or?
yeah, so basically these are the parts. You can actually change the spec map of those. So all you're going to do is change how basically matte or metallic they are. But because they're black, or most of these parts are black, with the exception of the badge, obviously, you can see the little badge, and
Yeah.
then these bonnet catches. I didn't, I'll be honest, I didn't really explore it. I just didn't see that I was motivated to
Yeah.
go after those layers or those areas anyway.
Yeah.
So I think I'll go back to my presentation and I'll do I think I'll do a recap. I'll go right back to the beginning. What I wanted to do was give you an overview of the painting process, at least how I see it, simplifying it um, by creating a template in GIMP that was a little bit more usable, especially when you're coming at it for the first time. You start to see which sections make more sense by doing that paint by numbers thing. You can use GIMP and Inkscape, and I appreciate that I talked about two pieces of software that have a gazillion features each of them, and I only touched on the really basic ones. But ultimately, you only use, the importing and exporting of files, and then the scaling, rotating, and placement. And I might not have even, I don't think I covered an example of how to rotate, but um, you know, I could just give you a quick one. So say if well, I brought the Sunoco in and it happened to be the right orientation. So if I bring something else in and it isn't, I'll say open as layers. Wait, now let me just come back down into the paintable area. Open this up. Open as layers. What else do I have here? No. A wing end plate. Okay, this is a good example because you'll have one in one position and then you'll have to rotate to get the other one. So I'll open that. So it's there in the middle. We'll use our move tool, and we'll kind of move it down to where we want it to be, more or less. And I'll zoom in a little bit on it. I'll switch our wire back on just to help us out with positioning. And obviously it fits for the lower one because I use that shape to draw it or to make it in Inkscape to make the lines look really nice. Especially the diagonal lines when you're painting in raster, they don't look very nice. But I want it to be in this orientation. So you go into the layer section, transform, and rotate 180 degrees. Really kind of simple stuff, but that's the kind of operations that you're going to do. You're going to import, you're going to place, scale, and transform. So sometimes you'll be turning it 90 degrees, sometimes 180 degrees, maybe even flipping it. So if you had, say, a symmetrical design, and you were bringing in one side and it didn't have anything that mattered, you could easily just take that, take the right line and duplicate it, make a copy of it and then flip it. And then you could easily, place it on the other side of the vehicle. So that would be another good tip is don't work on you don't necessarily have to work on the whole car at once. If you work on one side, one half of the car, you get that looking and, using your showroom, say we'll only work on this part of the car, you see it and you like how it looks. Then, then you can just copy it and bring it across to the other side. Because you'll bring it across and then you'll do some tweaks to the one side and then you'll be out of alignment. And so, kind of hold off to the end to do the stuff to the other side of the car. Yeah. All right. I think I've gone on long enough. I'm happy to take other questions or talk offline with people. It doesn't have to be tonight. It can be another time. I think Danny made a comment about me being passionate about it. I do enjoy it. I've got a photography kind of design background, so this kind of was in my wheelhouse. Using the tools. I won't say that I'm a pro in either one. I probably am better in Inkscape than I am in GIMP. But I wanted to have a custom livery. I was really motivated about it. I did one halfway through season 2, and I wanted to kind of continue a similar theme for season 3. My livery is quite simple, but I recreated a historical livery that was very meaningful to me. So looking at the Momo livery and this Sunoco livery, and I've got such great memories of Can-Am racing, and that's where those and IMSA GTP racing, those kind of things are really powerful as memories. So that was kind of built-in motivation to be able to figure out how to do it. It was a good challenge, but then to make them look good. I think my results for a fairly simple livery are quite effective, and I wanted to change it up to make it easier. I'm not that I'm about reducing. I'd like to reduce work. I mean, if you don't work smarter, what's the point? I'm all about that. So if there's a macro somewhere, I'm going to be finding it. So to me, this is kind of a macro in a sense, and it's my workflow in doing the paint by numbers, helping me to explain it. I probably don't go back to it anymore, but if I get mixed up, I'll switch it back on and I'll go, oh yeah, because I've got my head cocked 90 degrees to one way because did I rotate that the right way? I'll just switch that back on and boom, I know right away that's the right because especially the wing on the wing, it's not it's not intuitive. It just doesn't look like it should be turned that way, but it's how they built the 3D model. So I'm hoping that was helpful to people.
Yeah,
Um,
brilliant.
Extremely helpful.
I'm always around. So and others have jumped in as well. Chaz posted a comment earlier on that he's done some YouTube videos on his channel. I've not seen them, but I think there's quite a few people, and there's Luke and Johnny that do liveries probably far more seriously than I do. But I think you can, I've kind of introduced you to not literally the tools, but the method to do it. And then, it's going to take your creativity and a little bit of investment of your time that I think I've saved you some time in showing you kind of not necessarily the pitfalls, but the ways to make it more efficient and get to a half decent result a little bit quicker, and understanding what kind of where pieces are, because when you look at that the first time, you just go, what's that about?
What's going on there?
Yeah, what's going on? Yeah.
That's great.
Right.
Thanks, Giles. That's really useful. Thank you so much.
No problem. I hope everybody has a great evening and everybody's staying safe, and looking forward to racing against you guys in the season to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was
All right.
really helpful.
Bye bye.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.